Yeah, send them a message thing.
Even if they know who the commanders
I know the elevators are tough. You give 1 extra minute?
Oh, I think it's
You're not like that. No.
no. Alvaro is here, so I think we can start. And Randy also stumbles in. So we started like now, like 3:30, yeah, 1:50. Okay, everybody, welcome to the afternoon session 1. The plan is to actually talk about LSVR. It's interesting to see, the dynamics of the new scheduling mechanism here. So now suddenly, instead of like, the one before the last day in the afternoon, we are now on the last day in the afternoon, and the dynamics about people attending seems to be, interesting to say the least. Anyway, so we have a 2-hour slot here allocated for us. I don't. Looking into the schedule itself, I don't think we have like a very full agenda. So with a bit of luck, we will be able to fill it up. But my anticipation is that a lot of the work actually is being, reasonably, mulled over already, and we probably can, steam ahead, pretty well. So my co-chair right now is, distributing the blue sheet. So please fill it in, so that the next time we actually have a similar kind of like very comfortable large room, which actually fits us all very well. So that's fantastic. So now before we can start off, any volunteers for doing the JavaScript? I see somebody pointing at AC. I see 2 people pointing at AC. Okay. Okay, otherwise, we will monitor it from our end here, so that's okay. Anybody willing to do like minutes? So you don't have to do it alone. It can be done over the Etherpad, application. It is allowed to look at me right now. You don't have to look at your screen or at like something else. Any volunteers? Okay, Adam, thank you so much. So, okay, before we go on, you probably have seen this thing already. So anything you say, is actually going to be recorded. It's going to be part of a contribution towards the IETF. So you have to be aware of it. This is the, yes? Okay, so AC, cool, thank you so much. So we have to note, well, if this is the first time you see it right now, then you probably haven't really attended a lot of sessions. So I do recommend you in that case to actually read it very deep and detailed, and so that you're aware of it. So the first thing to look into where we are with our journey towards, standardizing, the LSVR, technology here. So we started IETF 101. We have done, 2 IETF meetings in general. We have done 2 interims to streamline, the progress of our work. I think right now, if you look into where we are in the quality of documents and how the documents actually are set up and the details which are included, I think we have progressed well, particularly seeing where we came from, in the beginning of the year. So it actually is going pretty well. The road forward for us is to actually have like 1 more IETF meeting, have like 1 more interim meeting to discuss some of the open topics, which actually may come out, as a result of some of the actions we're going to be taking, during this particular working group session here in Bangkok. So this is the agenda we have. So I took particular, very good care that the agenda, what I shown on the screen here, is actually the same agenda as what is posted on the website this time. The last time it tricked me a little bit. So as I mentioned, we have about like 120 minutes. And we've tried to carve it up in these kind of time slots. There is a little bit of time left, so we have about like 10 minutes spare looking into this agenda. So, I see some people actually who have been allocated like 50-minute slot and actually gave me a 40-slide presentation. So maybe that could be potentially, used by those people to actually, do it that way. So for the rest, so this is the agenda. Anybody wants to say something about it, shuffle with it, or, just, say victory and, be super happy and make a dance of joy? Okay, nothing. Okay, so let's keep on going then. So the first thing what I would like to say is like, if you look into the milestones of what we have, so we have like a set of, deliverables, talking about the technology itself. We also have something, which is not really started upon. I've been told it is not, something that is an element that requires a lot of time to progress, which is like, the manageability and the Yang specification for, link state vector routing. I'm just, pointing it out here. So, it is on track, but we do have, a milestone, in July. So we need to be aware of it. We should not really lose, visibility of it either. And it needs to be progress. So the people actually who want to start working on that, I motivate them to start looking into it. Okay, so yes.
Okay, Arcus, I just want to make a quick comment on that. I think that would be also pending on, there is a dependency on BGP Yang model, which has been discussed at the IDR working group.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so looking into your agenda, then actually we can start with our, first presentation here, and that is to give like a 15-minute, high-level overview of some of the conclusions and discussions we actually had, during the interim meeting in October itself. So Jacob will be, presenting this, out of wherever he is based in the US. It's like very late at this side of the planet, so that's why I put him first on the agenda. So this will be a remote presentation, so for the next 15 minutes. Hello, Jacob. You can hear us? You can talk? Yeah. Hello, can you say something? I'm not hearing you. Yeah. Can you walk up to the meeting room thing again so we can push the big, massive red button here? Sorry for this.
He was on there.
Ah,
Yes, it's working now.
all right, there we go. I have audio, I think, but not video, it seems. I have a... Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So just tell me which slide you want to beam, okay?
Okay, so I'll tell you next slide, I guess. I can't see the slides as you show them on my screen. I think there might be some browser issue or something, but we'll try to keep in sync. And I won't need 15 minutes. So so as you know, if you go to past the title slide to slide number 2, so the meta meeting info slide.
Yes.
All right, so we met on October 1st in California. In the morning, met for about 2.5 hours or something. There was 10 of us and the 2 chairs. And as you already provided the where are you, obviously in IETF 103, and these are the updates from what happened in interim meeting number 2. So you can go to the next slide there, Gunter. So on slide number 3.
Yes.
The intent, of course, with all the interim meetings is to continue to drive the deliverables forward. And to that end, we met and discussed the link state discovery protocol. We did a deep dive in that. Randy provided a lot of updates, starting with the requirements that we're building after we build the draft, of course, as he says in typical IETF fashion. Went through that and had a number of updates we'll talk about, our discussions that we'll talk about here in a minute, and then went through the draft. That was the majority of the discussion, and Kior provided some updates that were made to the BGP SPF draft in response to comments that had been made from various reviewers. And then we finished with some security requirements and discussions that we'll talk about here in a minute. So you can move on to slide number 4. So the link state over Ethernet requirements, we did a basic review of the requirements, essentially coming to the conclusion that 1, it needs to be simple. We need layer 2 liveness and simplicity. We need to be able to discover nodes and links, and of course that should be simple. And we need to then discover encapsulations and provide some northbound API to BGP SPF. Throughout the discussion of the requirements as well as the actual draft review, we kind of kept coming back to this need for, we think we need something security related, but we don't really know what it means. And we came to some conclusions that we'll talk about providing some hooks. And then Randy did a review of the other options that could be used for this kind of thing, and none of them quite seemed to fit what we need for LSVR. Next slide, please. Slide number 5. So on the draft review, there was significant updates to the draft and the O2 draft. And we went through and reviewed the motivations for why we need such a thing. We spent some time talking about the checksum that's needed, whether it's 32-bit, 64, 128-bit, and kind of shot somewhere in the middle. We talked some about the changes that were made around the interlink ether protocol, particularly around we need to assume that we should always expect a new node and how that should change hellos and so forth. Again, spent some time talking about security and authentication, which was the introduction to what we've called the security blob. And that's an effort to be able to provide some hooks into being able to provide security should somebody need or want to be able to take advantage of that. And we spent some time talking about hellos, keep alives, timescales, one versus the other, etc. And now we talked about the draft review of BGP SPF. This is on slide 6. So the status update is, at that time, it's mostly in a stable state. Updates were made from some of the comments and the reviews that were made from the reviewers. And we believe, at least at that time, it's ready for some implementation work. There was some added manageability considerations and some, that was one of the comments that was made. And what do we do about explicit withdrawals? And that was kind of left as part of the discussion. And finally, the last thing we kind of wrapped up about was what do we do about security? Obviously, it's important, but we don't really know what the threat model is. And so that's kind of led us to, well, what if we create this blob that we can use to add security somebody could hook into, and then perhaps maybe we create an informational draft that says this is one way that we could use this as kind of a path for somebody to be able to take. And we sort of left it there. We talked about, well, maybe some of the things would be to be able to provide identity, so we could tell who was trying to connect on our LSOE link, provide authentication, maybe privacy even, but we kind of left it at that. There was some discussion throughout the interim meeting of what do we do process-wise to get some of these things through the IETF? Where does some of these like LSOE live, and how do we handle it? Obviously for IETF 103, which I assume since we're there now, that was all taken care of, and that pretty much wraps up what we talked about in the interim meeting.
Okay, so thank you for that, Jacob.
Absolutely.
So I see nobody at the mics here. So that means you, yes, wrong. Randy is at the mics.
Randy Bosharkis. Jacob, there have been further thoughts on security, and I'll present them shortly. But credit should go to Eric Klein for bringing up the issue.
Thank you, Randy. So, okay, Jacob, that's it. And I think you actually can go to sleep at your side of the planet. Thank you for this. I think you move microphones now, Randy. So we don't have like a small square. We have a little cross to stand on. It's a very small one, though. You have a clicker.
Thank you.
And you have 40 slides.
Actually, a bunch of them don't belong there, but you demanded my slides, so I gave it to you before I was ready.
Okay, thanks.
Randy Bosharkis, and you'll notice a new victim has been added to the draft, Rob Austein. And that's because he's implementing. And so we've been sitting side by side for 10 days now in the NOC, with me making a mess of the draft and him trying to implement it and beating me up. So, oh God, you can't make it so it just flips properly?
Let me see. Voila.
Merci.
Welcome.
So you'll remember this, which is mainly, I believe I can go slowly, right? Because we have plenty
You
of time.
have 30 minutes.
That's called slowly. So what we're talking about is Ethernet protocol to pass link state and the address families and encapsulations that are available on each device. And it'll be pushed up to BGP, SPF, or some upper layer protocol to actually communicate between devices. So to form the topology of the network, et cetera. So what's new and different? New data framing. We now call the message, the entire application message, the traditional name is a protocol data unit, and it may occupy multiple datagrams because of the MTU or other limitations of an Ethernet frame. And they get reassembled, and they can be reassembled into, the datagrams can be reassembled into a PDU because each one has a number and a length and a checksum. So it's kind of like UDP, okay? And there's a flag that says this is the last one of a PDU. So if there's a nice short little datagram, there'll only be one datagram with the last one flag turned on. Okay. Every datagram has a TLV. There are 8 ones that we know now. And the thing that's interesting is this used to be called an encapsulation act, and now it's called an act because it will be used for more than encapsulations. And the sessions are made clear because open is act. So it now becomes you send me an open, I send you an open, each of us act to each other. We now have established a session instead of this kind of spacey thing where I got an open, so I think I can talk to you, but I don't really know. So we now have sessions, and this is this diagram I've been showing all along. Why is that one behind? That's exciting. Okay. I click again, whatever. Okay, so the hello has changed in that it is now acknowledging that we have to send it via multicast, because if I wake up and there are lots of devices out there, I don't know who I'm going to. So I send the hello multicast. All responses will be unicast. But there's an issue that there are multiple kinds of multicast. The two most interesting to us, and we're getting Paul Congdon's help on deciding them, are: does this multicast Ethernet frame pierce a switch or not? In other words, is it only good on this Ethernet point-to-point link, or can it go across switches? And that, we presume we will make that a configuration option for the device. Okay. You get a hello, respond with an open, you establish a session, et cetera, et cetera. Open has my name, your name, a count of attributes in case anyone forgets. The list of attributes goes here, and we don't know what those attributes mean, only the operator does. And they could be what flavor coffee they like or anything they wish. As mentioned, there's an authentication blob. I'll get into this a little more later. One thing that could happen is I could wake up, find myself that I've got a TPM, go over my management interface, and ask the TPM God in the sky to sign a certificate with that, and I put the signed certificate chain down here. Otherwise, I could take my public key and just stick it in there, and we do what's known in the security community as TOFU, which is trust on first use. I call it marriage on first date, but that's another matter. It's not something I'm very fond of. We have the local and remote IDs, which can be an ASN, a concatenation of 36 identifiers, or anything you want. I suggest they be uniform and unique in the data center. Okay, the attributes can be anything. As I said, the authentication data might be a certificate chain. Failure to authenticate, if there is a non-zero authentication field, is a failure of the session. And you start again. As I said, open gets an ACK. Other things are going to get ACKs. What's ACKed is the type of PDU that is being ACKed. So it will be an open PDU type here for an open. It will be an encapsulation PDU, etc. Okay. If I don't receive an ACK, there's a timeout, retransmit, failure count. I'm sure the transport people will give us good input on this. In other words, exponential back off and put your finger in your right ear, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so once we have each other's MACs and we've acknowledged them, we have open, we can start layer 2 keep alives between the two. Okay, there's no protein in this keep alive. Okay, so I think they should probably be infrequent, on the order of seconds or a minute. But the operator knows, of course, it will be configurable and so on and so forth. This is to be differentiated from BFD, which is probably running quite quickly. Okay, one of the reasons I think this one will be slow is if you choose to do security, you'll see later on that this should be signed, and signing and verification are expensive operations, especially in devices that have high out degree. Okay. So now we've met each other and we have our MACs, we have our node IDs, we can send encapsulations, and they all have the same header, which is what's their length, what's the count of encapsulations, and the list of encapsulations. And all the encapsulations kind of look like this. There's the count. There's a flag that says Is this a primary address on this interface? Is this a loopback address reachable via this interface? And then in this case, we're doing an IPv4 address, and there can be lots of them. Okay, a big change from the previous draft is an encapsulation message of type T replaces all previous encapsulations of type T. So you don't have to remember, and you don't have to worry about, oh, did I miss an update? And and so you're maintaining this changing state. No, here's the list. Take it and shut up. Okay. So as I said, is this an interface of primary? Is it, and one should be marked as a primary, and it can be marked as a loopback. IPv6, 96 more bits, no magic. MPLS has a list of MPLS labels for each encapsulation. Not very exciting, a list of labels. Okay, use multiple encapsulations to allow one label to be associated with multiple. Here's a v6 encapsulation. That's about the protocol. I will not go and bother you with the section that goes in how this is pushed up to BGPLS through the BGPLS API to BGPS SPF, because you've gotten to hear that 3 times already. That must be boring. It is unchanged. But we're looking, thank you, Eric, at security. And what we think at the moment when we talked about the threat model was...
So Randy? AC Lindum?
Hi,
Cisco?
AC.
I haven't read the latest version, but are you still reusing the BGPLS attribute space for anything? You're not anymore. You're defining all your own. So you're going to have your own space.
Specifically reusing. Stolen right out of BGP.
But there's a lot of
SPF.
things in here, like the certificate, that aren't in there.
The certificate, but, well, this is this slide.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, what is the purpose of the security? The threat model we have here is, are you on the link, the droid I was talking to yesterday?
Okay.
Not exchanging security stuff up at the SPF level.
Okay. Okay.
So there's no
yes,
need
yes,
to
okay.
move the security information.
That's not
northbound.
We can. I know that. Okay, we were talking about that. Okay, so you're calling these encapsulations. That's different terminology than in BGPLS. So you're still but you're calling them encapsulations, but you're reusing all the TLVs from BGPLS, right?
Not all of them, certainly.
Sorry, some of them
That's
like
a very target-rich environment.
but the link, all the link identifiers from the BGPLS. I'm familiar.
Yes.
I've implemented
Not
that.
all of them.
I've implemented BGPL. No, not all of them. I see which ones. Okay, but you are using the same space, the same IANA register.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay.
Just stole it right out of BGP SPF. Kayer can beat you to death on it.
Okay,
Okay, but
hold on. So it's actually before you.
Oh,
Sorry. So you're on.
Hi, Susan.
Oh, okay. Randy, does the change in the structures, I counted 8 or so different changes from the last time. When implemented, what's the timing on it? Are you seeing the level of time that you need in order to make sure you get the appropriate second or sub-second failover?
Currently, A, it's configurable. B, that's the kind of thing where you do BFD. We're not trying to supplant BFD.
I'm talking, Randy, instead of the BFD hello, the upward push to the BGP API to let you know that you do have a neighbor. In your original presentation in IETF 102, you were considering how long it took to go upwards, and you had that question whether this process would be fast enough. In this current implementation, have you seen that same concern, or has that concern been resolved based on implementation experience?
We haven't gotten that far in implementation yet, but we learn it down at the link layer, we push it up.
Understood that point. Just looking for feedback.
No, implementation's not that far along yet. Care?
Okay, Patel, Arcus, I was simply going to answer to AC's question. Think of this as sourcing the routes for BGP SPF. So we wouldn't be even using any of the LS registries. Would simply source it to create the necessary information.
Paul Congdon, I've got a couple basic protocol questions. Is it one TLV per PDU or multiple? One. Okay, that's simple. Second question was, you are allowing the PDUs or the messages, PDUs to span multiple frames. You have a number. Your ACK didn't have any kind of number in it though. So how, it seemed like we might need to look at the ACK.
The ACK acts the whole PDU. You're responsible as a
So
receiver for
it's-
assembling. If you can't assemble and or don't have a PDU in a certain amount of time with the L bit on,
Okay, so it's
then you time out.
one at a time. Okay.
Yeah, it's
One at a
dead,
time.
dumb, simple.
Okay, and then my last question, maybe more of a comment. You have a version number in there, and in the draft you say if it's not this version, then it's a failure. And I'm wondering if you want to reconsider that for something that might allow for some sort of forward compatibility or some,
We've done this before in other protocols, and what we do is the replacement RFC makes the liberalization of the version number and says it can now be 0 or 1, and this updates this RFC.
But the old guy, what I'm advocating is that it's possible, it does put some burden on future versions, but it is possible for an old version to talk to a new version if you specify it. And we do this a lot in 802.1, but again, it's
Point taken.
So anyway,
Send a
that's-
nasty note,
oh, okay.
because I'll forget instantly. I've already forgotten.
Sorry, Rob Ostine. I just want to gently speak against that last point. Generally, it's fairly straightforward to say, I'm version 0. I only understand version 0. Version 1 can understand both. It's not impossible, but it's challenging to be forward compatible with something that hasn't been specified yet. And we're trying to keep this stupid. So that's kind of why we ended up with the way it is. If there's a really strong reason to do forward compatibility with stuff we don't understand yet, we can look at it, but I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I understand. It does put a constraint on going forward. Though typically what we do is version 0, if a version 0 of implementation receives a version 1 PDU, he only looks at version 0 fields. So in other words, it kind of restricts you to maintaining
How does he know
things,
where those fields are?
because they're in the same place they were in version 0.
You
So it
don't
does
know
put,
that.
well, then this is what I'm saying. Then if you have an incompatibility where you've changed the PDU such that these two guys cannot talk to one another, then you either have a different protocol or you go with what you're talking about. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting this is because you have the requirement that your hello protocol will continue on, because you need to find guys that might be on a multi-drop link.
That appear.
So
magically.
if I needed to talk to a version 1 guy and a version 0 guy that happened to be in this thing, I'm going to be sending multiple hellos of different versions, all, so you kind of, it just kind of creates some overhead. So it's just thought, but I understand the challenge, but it's worth considering. So I'll send you a note on that.
Worth considering is, I think, the operative phrase, and we'll consider seriously. It's an ugly. Back to security. Okay. I posted a threat model to the list back at IETF -1, and nobody responded. I said, How many operators are there here? Don't you care? Oh, they all cared. Well, then respond. What I suggested was that the one threat is spurious devices appearing on your network, somebody plugging a hostile laptop in, et cetera, et cetera. In which case, the concern is this the droid I was talking to earlier? In other words, I had a hello exchange, whether that came from a joined certificate or a made up naked public key, is I thought I knew who I was talking to. Am I still talking to you? Okay. So there was not a clear need for confidentiality, just integrity and continued authority. So what we're thinking is the open can have a public key plus whatever. It could be wrapped with certificate stuff obtained from the provisioning server in the sky, whatever. The public key is signed with the private key on open. That's proof of possession right there. In other words, you know that the person issuing the open, that has the private key matching the public key. We don't want to have kinky key exchanges, etc. That's expensive, complex, etc. So just pay 512 bits per frame to put a 255-19 signature on the end of everything. I'm an operator. I charge by the traffic. 255 bits is great, right? And our PDUs are easily extended, so no harm. The keep alive would get a sequence number, which cranks each keep alive, and probably other things would get the keep alive, get a sequence number too. So that would narrow the window for a replay attack. Want me to drill down on that one a little? Everybody's either bored or understands replay attacks. Okay. What's not here is we probably dump the checksum because validating the key is sufficiently equivalent. Okay. Maybe add a proof of possession challenge response PDU pair. So we drift on, even though I'm fairly assured no replay is happening. Do you really have the private key for that public key? It's a cheap PDU pair. Desperately would like some feedback on this one before we dig it in. Also, do we want to put this in the in the LSOE protocol? Do we want two different protocol drafts? Alvaro's looking at you.
Hi, Alvaro Tana, Routing AD. Security should go into the same draft, right? So that we know what you're protecting the protocol with. And I just want to say another thing. As you consider this, and I know that, as you said, no one has necessarily given you a lot of feedback, but also think of not just when this is used, because this is the base protocol spec, not when this is used only in the data center, but if whatever be used somewhere else, right? So for example, confidentiality, right? You mentioned that maybe there's not a need for confidentiality in the data center.
No, I didn't ask the data center that. What's confidential about these data?
I'm just saying. So
yeah.
What I need you to do is, if you don't think there's anything confidential about this data, and I tend to agree, then please justify that in the draft, right? So that, it's easy to not just ask why isn't there, this in the security, but to understand why, the justification behind that. That way we should avoid, discussions that we don't need to repeat too many times.
Don't go away. The current SecCons, in the current non-secure draft, says this should not be used outside a closed wall data center because you don't have authentication. Okay, this will help you towards that. If people are thinking of using this on the WAN, do you want confidentiality? What's your threat model? Please tell me. A security geek without a threat model is like a horse without a bicycle. Okay, now we get into the boring stuff that we had from last time. Nothing has changed. So I'm kind of at the end of it. I'd really like people's feedback on whether we do this at all. What's the threat model behind it? Do you want confidentiality? Do we separate this into two versions of the protocol? Or is this okay? And remember, this means every PDU has a signature calculation and verification. We're specifically thinking of an algorithm which is fairly cheap to do, well, fairly, 255.19. 255.19. You do 255.19?
I don't get the reference.
Oh, sorry. It's a crypto algorithm. It's not RSA.
Rob Austin again. That actually segues into a question I was going to ask. How many people in the room have any clue about the difference between signatures, message authentication, checksums, and that sort of thing? Okay, a few. So I want to spend 30 seconds on why we did the design we did. It boiled down to a choice between doing the stupidest, simplest possible signature over the messages or having to do some kind of complicated setup to negotiate a session key. And if we were willing to negotiate a session key, we could do something like HMAC instead of signatures. The problem is when you start looking at it and you start asking people who know what they're doing, the advice boils down to either use TLS, which is kind of heavyweight for this, or by the time you're done doing all the things you need to do, you will have reused TLS, you just aren't admitting that. So we chose to skip all of that. The price tag for that is we actually have to compute signatures on every message instead of doing just one setup for its session at the beginning. So it's a deliberate design trade-off to keep this as simple and stupid as we could.
AC Lyndon, is this only in your presentation or is it in the draft now? This whole security, how you bootstrap the open and then
It
with
is
the
not
public.
in the draft.
Okay. So if we were going to think more about this, we'd just download the presentation, look at it.
Just one foil.
Oh, well.
I won't
Well, there's
touch
two. There's the open. There's what you do on the open, and then there's once you get the public key in the open. That tells this.
We can start to sketch it out if given a little encouragement. Right, Paul, you come from the other side. What do you think? Do you think authentication, repeated authentication is worth the cost?
I guess I'd be concerned about signing something with the same permanent credential for the duration and the life of the product. I mean, I don't know if that's.
You want to renegotiate the credential.
Well, that you didn't want to create a session key, so to speak, but that one of the reasons for that is so that you're not using your primary key all the time.
Current
right?
spec says that if I'm running along in a session and I receive another open from you, oh my God, that means probably you have been reset. But it also says, do not destroy state. So that could be finessed into a key change.
AC Lyndon, so there's nothing to say you couldn't use a different public-private key at anytime, right? I mean, with this,
Well,
you'd need to open a
we
new
need to
session.
agree with on it. Well, you don't.
Why would you
wanna
need to
com-
agreement? You're giving them the public key, and they're using that. You're giving them the public key out of a public-private key pair, and then you're using that to verify the signing of the message. So I don't see why you couldn't change it at any time. It would be up to the sender to do that.
It just has to be specified that receiving this change does not cause you to drop all the encapsulations you know. Don't drop state. But I'm still thinking about, oh, I've got state with you for V4 and V6 address families. I receive a new open from you. I receive a new V4 encapsulation that is or is not the same as the last one. It replaces it entirely. I don't receive anything about V6. How long do I keep my V6 state? Not clear. Other questions? Other answers? Thank you.
Maybe one question from a chair perspective here. So the document itself, how stable you think it is at this point in time? You think you see like many big changes going on forward? Or?
Not unless we do security. I think it's fairly close. We have the protocol in the condition that I believe we can do a reasonable state diagram. We have a prototype implementation coming out that we plan to beg management to allow us to release. But if they don't, they don't. That's their choice. That's why they're called management. And what we really need is more eyeballs on it.
Okay.
That's you.
So the reason I'm asking is because it's okay, it's more to the room here now.
You have a schedule. We understand. We're engineers. We get told about the schedule every day.
Well, this time the schedule is relatively flexible. So the reason I'm asking is because between, the last couple of, the last IETF meeting and where we are right now, there have been a few things, being discussed from, a BGP, neighborship, discovery. How do I do this here? Voila. So we've been discussing actually, on how to progress some of these elements going forward. So the chairs from LSVR and IDR have been sitting together, together with the area director, and also during the IDR interim meeting here, this topic actually has been discussed about like auto discovery, and there clearly actually is like an evident interest in this particular topic from many working groups. So the next couple of slides I've sort of like I've stolen from the good work from John Scudder, what he actually has used during his IDR interim meeting, and at the end of the 4 or 5 slides what I have here, I'm going to go over it very quickly. I would like to plan our way forward with this technology itself. Okay? So in IDR actually it was discussed that indeed there's clearly like interest from a lot of working groups to actually work on this, and also within LSVR itself, a technology like this is not really chartered. Now we're a little bit open in our charter for this, so we can potentially plot something in. And also from an LSVR perspective, I really think that some of the deliverables of what we have and the embodiment of that and the real operation needs to have something like this, because otherwise it's going to be very hard to do a technology like LSVR. So now looking into all the different options we have, and there are like many different ways of skinning the cat here, our area director has been very smart and realized why do we need actually if we can have like do only one, that would be better from a technology progress perspective, and it would make things easier for for everybody else. So that's a very good vision and a very good view. Now at the same time we also need to look into where we are, what LSVR is doing, and some of the other working groups, because we actually are like, developing something relatively new. And from that perspective, our, technologies we use going forward may be a little bit more newer also. Okay. So now at the same time, like in IDR, there's like a whole set of different kind of proposals being, talked about, in this space of auto discovery. So they're still comparing, on what would be best for them. Now, all of these different all these different proposals, they can be like mixed and matched in different ways. So they haven't really converged into like, what is the best for IDR? Yeah? So they still need to compare, like, okay, what are the similarities? What are the differences? How to use it best and how to progress those things. Yeah? So they're not there yet, so they haven't really converged, and it is a little bit unclear, like, when actually there will be like a convergence, in their direction. Now, at the same time, if you look into the requirement itself, from all of these different teams, you see like one particular requirement, and the one which actually all of these actually have is that, it's mainly to actually trigger, the bootstrap on a single hop eBGP. That is the main common thing. Now, of course, if you look into all of them and you put, all of the requirements into a union, it's a much bigger pool of things. It's something like, like carrying, buckets of water towards the sea. It's a lot of requirements. So that being said, so from an IDR perspective, and again, I've copied these slides here from the IDR working group. Do I have something on the back of this? Yeah. So they haven't really converged, which direction to go yet. So there are a lot of strong opinions on where to go and what to do. They are going to be planning like an interim meeting to talk about this. Now, I'm not really sure it makes a lot of sense from an LSVR perspective to actually wait upon them until IDR actually converges to something, because also their requirements are going to be vastly different from our requirements. So Randy has, like, in the last couple of, LSVR meetings, been talking about requirements and, what we actually need. So go AC.
Excellent of Cisco systems. The one place where there's an intersection here is because it reuses the BGPLS TLV space, you need to have an agreement to be able to, I think there may be, like you said, there's different requirements, more requirements. You're going to have to be able to add at least attributes, and just an agreement that we'd be able to, by we I mean this working group, use the same IANA space and registries.
Okay, thank you.
Randy Bush. My reading so far is the BGPLS space covers everything from RTP to Jabber. I think my read is that IDR sees a problem coming. Not a big one, but something that would be nice to solve. They say, this happening over here, it's still, IDR is big and slow and has a large burden on their back that they have to carry. And so I think they're watching and will figure it out, or they will use something else. And if they have input, of course, they should be taken very seriously. Right now, they haven't given us much input, and that's their prerogative. So we're plodding along in our kind of stupid, keep it simple way, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you. So actually, going, further into this, so what actually was discussed in IDR also, and is that, so LSOE right now, it's a proposal in this particular working group, and what we agreed actually, with the chairs from IDR, is that, if we, plan to progress this work further on in this working group here, that it should not exclude, the future requirements from an IDR perspective. So IDR will also look into what LSOE actually is doing, and, they will actually, really assess, together with the other, proposals, if these actually will satisfy their needs. Now, that on one end. Now that does not mean that IDR, in the future will actually choose LSV itself from from a neighborship discovery perspective. Just also keep in mind, LSV is not really, creating the neighborship or establishing the neighborships at all. It's just providing you the hooks with sufficient information to actually, trigger that particular that event itself. Now, all of this being said, so the thing what I would like to, propose going forward is, to understand, to maybe actually, adopt this work in our working group. So that is something what I would like to, propose going forward. I know the charter, it's a little bit, on the adjacency of the charter itself. It probably has to modify, to be modified a little bit. So my plan is to, is going forward to actually, do like a working group, adoption call for LSOE, unless there is like anybody in the room who is like, is violently in disagreement with such, a proposal.
Yeah, Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. So from the last update to this update, we've seen that there is a transport layer being introduced in LSOE. There's fragmentation and reassembly coming in. Checksum was there, but it's changed. There is an open session, and there is some kind of a session management aspect coming in. Randy also talked about a protocol state machine. There are a lot of interactions with other protocols, like we have encapsulations exchange here, but we also have ARP and ND. The hooks with BGP or whatever application is running on top, they have not been specified as much in details. So I would suggest that the work group wait and look at those details before considering adoption.
Keyur Patel, Arcus. Clearly, I don't disagree. I disagree with that comment. The reason why we started off with LSOE was fundamentally because we said LLDP cannot scale beyond certain packet size. And it couldn't scale because the AD information could extend beyond 1500 bytes. So some of the things that you mentioned were already as part of the design document that we wanted to start it off with.
Jacob Heights, Cisco Systems. I brought the auto discovery of the whole network, not just your neighbors, on Monday. And I was told very clearly that there is no auto discovery required because data centers are planned, and every piece that's put into the data center is put in there according to the plan, and nothing needs to be discovered. And this came from two people who actually build data centers, to build massive scale data centers, and I respect their opinion. So is there any need at all for auto discovery?
There's definitely a need for verification. Hi, Igor Yahoo, of one of the guys that Jacob's talking about. There's definitely a need for verification if something is wired correctly. There's not much need for, it's not so much auto discovery as verification. So we're not looking for something that auto discovers and automatically will start up every protocol under the sun magically. We just need to know if something's wired correctly. And if we get to know if something is configured correctly, okay, cool, that's extra verification. But we actually don't want for protocols to start automatically, because we test the network as we bring it up, and unless the protocol will perform all of this testing, like fire 20,000 pings down the link and make sure that it's all clean, there's no errors, etc., then we wouldn't actually want the protocol to come up first.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I'm cutting the line, after Ignace. Unless Alvaro wants to speak after that.
I don't think anybody's suggesting using this to bootstrap any protocols. There is a wide range of how people build things out. The example I like to use for the extreme centralized end is Jupiter Rising, of course, where everything is blown down to the device. It wakes up on the management network and it's told, here is your world. To Igor in the middle, who has some of that, but also wants to verify it by, you told me that Mary was over there, is she? To folk who want to do fairly complete discovery, not start protocols, but fairly complete discovery so that the protocols which do start can then use those data. I think all of those are reasonable places. This is designed for the second to the third. Woo!
Ketan Tadavlikar, Cisco. To answer Keyur's point, this could use IP or UDP, which is what one of the other proposers is doing. And I have not seen and it could really do all the functionality without having the complications, leverage existing stuff, ARP, ND, IP, fragmentation, reassembly, all of that. So I haven't really seen actual strong reason for doing it at link level and not IP. LLDP was from IEEE, so they could only do at that level. But here at IETF, we could do it on top of IP. So I haven't seen a strong argument to do it at link level.
Keyur Patel again. I would suggest we are more than happy to discuss about some of these requirements, but Randy has a good set of requirements document that I would suggest you take a look at it, make that as a starting point, and then we can have the conversation.
Wim Hendricks, Nokia. First of all, I think there is environments which don't need auto-discovery, but there are environments where we do need auto-discovery, I think. So from that point of view, I think we need something to be enhanced from what we are. Whether it has to be done here or not, I don't have a real strong opinion, but I think it would be good to to go through the list of all the bootstrapping and auto-discovery mechanisms which were identified in your slides to see whether there is some additional requirements which we haven't captured here. But I think the set which is defined here is pretty well defined in my view, and as such, it would make sense to continue this because I think it has a good base or a good foundation as such.
Yeah, so, yeah.
AC Lindum Cisco, I'd agree with Wim and Keyur. I think there's a lot of different requirements. I think the fact that protocols like LLDP exist is enough, and CDP, proprietary Cisco Discovery Protocol, is enough of a justification. Also, even if you're just using it for verification, that doesn't mean that you want your config templates. You don't want something like this. You don't have to have your config templates cluttered with a configuration of every neighbor on every link. So there's, even if you're verifying it and you're doing some level of verification, this is still useful in the bigger data centers.
Okay, thank you. You want to say something, Alfredo? Words of wisdom?
I guess two things. One, I do want my config templates to be cluttered because I don't want anything to be magically defaulted, because magic defaults change between code versions, between vendors, etc., and shit breaks bad, unfortunately. But I do want to say something. So we do need auto discovery from a verification perspective. The question now is, what do we want to auto discover? And what are the limitations of the current protocols? So if, for example, LLDP is limited to 1,500 bytes, and at some point we might have 70 IP addresses on interface, v4, v6, etc., and it doesn't fit in 1,500 bytes anymore, we've got a problem. So we really should look at what are the current scalability limits of discovery protocols and whether we see that we could exceed those. Because at some point we might be discovering every label that's available on your peer. And at this point, is 1,500 bytes enough?
Alberto, I'm assuming the next thing you're going to say is you're going to ask a question about adoption, right? I mean, you started the discussion by saying that.
Yeah,
Is that what you're
depends on
going
what you're going to be saying.
Well, assuming that you're going to say that.
Words of wisdom.
I don't know if words of wisdom, but what I want to say is that in one of the other slides that this are slides from IDR that John made, he said that I suggested that we have one protocol. I still would prefer that because it's easier for everyone to do one thing. However, as he finished saying in this slide, the recommendation from the chairs is that we don't delay the work, right? That we go ahead. Now, what that means is that if this working group decides to move ahead with LSOE, there is a probability or a possibility at least that we might end up with more than one discovery protocol, right? There's a possibility that IDR will say, okay, let's use LSOE to discover, BGP sessions in general. But there's also a possibility that IDR will say, we'll use something else. So we need to keep that in mind. That's the decision we go, that's the way we go. One of the things that we did discuss somewhere, I think maybe it was in the IDR interim, is that of course if that happens, it would be nice for BGP to be able to get discovery information from any of the protocols, right? And still be able to come up. So one thing that we need to keep clear, and I think if I remember correctly, but if not, you can check the minutes from the IDR meeting. It was suggested there that maybe in a separate document somewhere, that type of information was documented so that we know that we need X information to boot up or to start a BGP session, and so that the protocols that are discovering provide that information. Right? Otherwise, we end up with not just multiple protocols, but protocols that don't do the same thing or even have similar functionality. We had also discussed, just to give everyone the whole picture, the fact that because the initial interest was in this working group, and assuming that LSOE is the one thing that we would have chosen, that of course we could start the work here. You have the first, the basic protocol and the initial requirements, and then other people like IDR or whoever else wants to go use the discovery protocol could add that. So what that means, and of course Randy and the other authors know this, is that the protocol obviously has to satisfy initially the requirements from this working group, but has to of course be extensible to satisfy whatever else, right? This is an obvious thing. I'm just saying it just to make sure that everyone knows that. So I think that's it. I just wanted to provide that other background to other things that we considered, so that you think about it when you make your decision on what you want to do.
I have a question. Has anybody actually done an analysis of what's missing between LLDP and what LSOE provides, and if it's possible to retrofit it and or rev to LLDP version 2 or whatever? Because I think all of us would rather have fewer things on box that start up and try to do the same thing at the same time.
First problem we hit was the size limit on LLDP being 1,500.
So just
It's IPR barrier, not a protocol spec barrier.
So is the goal for LSOE to provide every bit of data that LLDP has and then do more? Why not? Why not just replace it?
It should not exclude.
No proof of termination. LLDP is a pretty rich, etc. protocol. Do you really want to do all that all over again? Yes is a perfectly valid answer, and we can start talking about, I'm sure all of the chairs want us to complete this so they can get LSVR out the door, and then we can do a version 2 that tries to replace all of LLDP, and that's possibly a perfectly valid path.
My concern is, so if you're going to have LSOE and LLDP, inevitably that's 2 discovery protocols. I guarantee that at least one of us large content guys is going to have to start writing stuff that trues up, reconciles between them. And the second you start doing that, all of us will, it's a lot of work, and all of us are going to wonder, why are there two? Why isn't there one thing to roll them all? And what happens when they disagree? Because at some point you're going to change an interface parameter and one of them will pick it up first.
So, Keyur Patel, Arcus, when we started off with this work, it's a classic rat hole if you start with that question. In sense, that's a valid question, but the kind of information we wanted to exchange was a configuration information and maybe some network related information. So we weren't looking per se to replace everything that is there in LLDP and augment it in LSOE, but we wanted to carry this information which is specifically auto discovery related. Now, protocol is designed and it's quite flexible. So if someone comes and says, why run two, I want to do with one, he could very well do it, but there is good reasons to not do that.
So what happens when LLDP says interface has one set of parameters and LSOE says something else? Because, I mean, you have a classic race condition.
So I'm thinking, we have to look into scheduling here a little bit also. I'm not really sure if, this discussion can maybe be taken offline.
I have sympathy with that, but all I'm saying is trying to replace LLDP is not something you want to do in the short term. Certainly willing to discuss it in the midterm. That make you happier?
So before we go, I'm just going to do another 2 minutes. I'll go to Lieutenant Rodriguez again. You guys know that this work is not chartered for the working group. Now, they always laugh at me, I know. But it's not chartered anywhere else either. Now, again, with the intent of not delaying any work or anything else, and because there has been a lot of discussion in this working group, we're fine with doing that. Because it's a layer 2 protocol, the other thing that we have to do is we need to liaise with the IEEE. Paul has obviously been helping us. He doesn't completely run the IEEE, just some pieces of it. So we have to liaise with them. Tomorrow, actually, there is a coordination meeting. No, there's 2 meetings. One is tomorrow morning, which is a regular coordination meeting. There's a list of action items and stuff like that. Gunter is going to go to that meeting tomorrow and is going to tell the IEEE people what we're thinking of doing. See what they say, right? We might need more liaisons. I don't know what we need, but for now, that's it. If the direction, even in a further version, is to go and replace LLDP, or not replace LLDP, to have the same functionality as LLDP, it is something important that we need to tell the IEEE. Because at that point, they might say, sure, do whatever you want. But they could also say, no, we can do LLDP version 2, or I don't know, whatever comes up. That doesn't have the same limitations, that does something else. So this is an important thing that we need to consider and that we need to tell them sooner rather than later, right? We can't wait 3 years from now and say, oh, you know what, that protocol that we already did, we're now going to change the scope and do something else, right? So either the scope is this, or the scope is that, or the scope is something else. But this is something that has to be clear with them. So as Gunther said, we should probably take this to the list.
Sorry, Randy, again. I don't do liaisons. I'm already married. And my job here is to make the internet better. If IEEE wants to take up some of that load, I am infinitely lazy, right? I'm perfectly happy. I would even work with ITUT if they would be helpful. Yes, really.
Okay. So listening to everything here, what has been said. So I'll be taking to the list to actually, do like a working group, adoption call for this work. Now, that being said, the working group adoption call will be, around the requirements we have for LSVR. So some of the comments of what I heard are like very valid, but they actually, are coming more from the perspective, from an IDR perspective. And that is discussion, which needs to be held like, the working group, because as what was discussed during the interim in IDR is like they may or may not, choose the same solution as us. Hopefully, what we're going to be choosing will be, simple enough and will allow extensibility to be helpful for them all, for IDR also. And that is definitely something we need to target for. And that's what Randy was mentioning also. Having a bit more eyeballs around, LSOE would be very helpful also, progressing the work and making sure that actually, does not exclude any future extensibility for drive, to help new working groups, to progress with their work. So that is, that's the future plan. So I think now we have AC. So if you can stand on the star and not next to the mic over there.
I promised to take less than a fifth of the time it took for that LSOE working group adoption call. So I just did an update on this before the IETF. And the one thing I added is on the, had a directorate call on the base document that CARE's going to be talking about, the BGP SPF, and they asked for discussion of peering models. And we deferred that to the applicability draft. So I put a section in there discussing the three sparse peering, the three sparse peering advantages in the models for those. I put those in there. And those are for, the advantages in parallel links, densely meshed data centers, and talking about the controller-based deployments. In the next revision, there's going to be a discussion of BGP policy and I got some editorial changes and anything else. So I'm going to, on the next edition and our next revision, I'd like to get routing directorate review, see if we can get some input. And anybody has any suggestions of anything that's missing from that? If not, we can call it done until, at least for this version. Okay.
We good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Okay, you have about like 45 minutes.
I probably wrap it up in another 5 minutes.
Well, look at that.
So Keyur Patel, I'm going to give an update on LSVR. The draft was last updated in September, right before the interim. We've incorporated comments from OpsDir and RTGDir. It's in a fairly stable state. Starting to look at implementations. Listed out the feedback. Here's the feedback from Fred Baker. Thinks it's ready. There was a minor nit in section 5.4, which was taken care of. Another review from Dan Frost. One of the concerns he listed was he thinks BGP is not designed for the general purpose database distribution. This was more a suggestion to ADs to look for a strategic long-term solution. Peering models were thought to be a little more brief. We have added text for that. We've added text again on the usage of sequence numbers. He thought it would draft would help with some examples. That has been already taken care of. There are tons of timers that have been used in BGP. We have, clearly as part of this extension, some of these timers may need to be augmented or may not need to be used at all. And his suggestion was to clearly list them out in manageability section and talk about what are those timers that are impacted and explain possible implications if you would sort of change them. We have already done that as part of a separate manageability section. Here are the version 2 changes. I'm not going to go through them since I have already discussed this in past presentations, but the draft's pretty much in a stable state. There is the one outstanding point that is worth discussing, which is about explicit withdrawals. Very similar to MaxAge LSA in OSPF. Should we incorporate this? Should we not? If we incorporate this, do we want to do it as part of the base pack, or do we want to take it as a separate draft? Up for the debate. Would be interested in getting feedback on the mailing list.
Read Dan's comment on, is this really the Universal Transport Protocol for database? Have you considered DNS?
At this point, any and every feedback is appreciated. We
This
could take
is
that.
my snarky version of, this is not a problem we're going to solve this week. It's a problem, which is why we pay the IAB and they don't deliver. Okay, and indeed we have a distributed database problem in the IETF and elsewhere, but I don't think we're going to solve it in time to get this protocol out the door.
AC Linux Cisco Systems and a co-author on this. This is because the reason for this is, and a lot of people have brought up, we knew this from the start, that if a link goes down and you just use the withdrawal mechanism in BGP, you won't quit using that link until every copy of that is removed from your BGP local rev. So, or local BRIV, the BGP RIV. Now, we don't really want to change more of the BGP machinery to try and maintain one copy. There's all sorts of things you could do with some invention, but we really want to move, other than just doing BGP SPF, we want to leave BGP alone and not raise the implementation bar for this by adding all this new invention. And also, we want to, not only implementation, the possibility of introducing things that don't work. We just want to do BGP SPF. Now, this would be a very simple thing to do, where rather than if a link goes down, you would advertise that it's down and for some period of time, and then you would withdraw the link, just so that you'd start recognize the failure with the first advertisement that reaches you, which would have a higher sequence number. You know, we have the sequence number rather than the last.
You'd need to add an attribute or some additional information to carry this if need be.
Hello, Victor Coursing, hat off on this one. It's not actually on this slide. It was a slide a couple slides ago. Just a comment on the comment about, you know, is BGP the best protocol to use, et cetera. I just want to, from an operator hat perspective, I think a lot of people forget why operators chose BGP in the first place. It wasn't necessarily because it was the best protocol for something. Operational simplicity and commonality was, in fact, one of the drivers. And I think a lot of folks forget that's why it was chosen. It wasn't because it's necessarily more performant than something else.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't because scientifically they decided it was necessarily the best thing to use. It was there, it was common, it simplified operations and a lot of other things that drive cost in organizations. And that's actually the main reason why us and a lot of other folks used it.
Low noise.
Pardon me?
Low noise, it's not chatting.
Yeah, well, not a lot of noise, but I mean, believe it or not, operations is one of the highest costs in most organizations.
Okay. Thank you.
That's all? Yep. So fast?
Yep.
Okay, you're fast.
You could call for adoption of LSOE again.
We have time.
I don't know if we do.
No, but going forward, actually, you know, with respect to this work, so one of the elements that worries me a little bit, with respect to this particular draft, has been, you know, the silenceness on the working group, email list. with respect to comments and feedback and additions and these kind of, little things. That's a bit unfortunate. Now, that being said, both the, operational directorate review actually, went, reasonably well. The routing, directorate review went reasonably well. And Randy wants to say something.
I'm known for voting with my feet. I'm writing a draft to support it.
Okay. So where I was going to is that, where was I going to? Yeah, so so for actually, further reviewing, this work, what I was thinking about is to actually, launch like a working group, last call on this document itself. Now, while doing that, so that is something we will start doing on the working group, email list, as a first, a step. Now, something which was, distributed also between, the different routing chairs is actually, to look into the requirement of actually having like, working implementation. So that is something, we still need to look into if we actually need that for LSVR, yes or no. And that is a discussion, which we, need to be having at some point in time, before pushing this work further, off the working group last call, towards ISG and so onward. So that is definitely something. Now, LSVR is like a new technology. I'm not really sure that we actually need to have like 2 implementations of this, like what we have in an IDR perspective. Because IDR, the assumption there is that you will actually need to be speaking between all different kinds of vendors, because operators have all different kinds of vendors, while the major use case scenario for this is to run in data centers. And that will probably often result like, one vendor doing most of the work over there. So that problem is not there. So we probably need to have like, one implementation, we actually, which has like something running like this. So that is something that we will be discussing, further on in the background also. But I will be launching a working group last call for this. I will expect, and not only desire, I will actually expect to see lots of people saying like why it is good, why it is bad, things need to be changed. If it is just like 500 plus ones, I'm sorry, that is not going to fly. It will stick, it will stay where it is.
Randy Bush again. I really don't know how many vendors we have in the IIJ data centers, but a friend of mine here in the States sitting near me says in his little data center, he has 3 vendors.
Okay.
So I wouldn't mind seeing 2 interoperable implementations.
Okay, that also means it's quite a, it's a gating requirement in that case.
I understand the problem, but I would like to encourage other people, Jacob, and I could go on, to join the party.
Okay. So also, I like that question also in the working group last call, just to understand, what the general perception is from operators on what the requirement there is, from a gating perspective. I'm open to anything, not to anything, but like, to a few things. And I'm willing to learn.
I think we definitely want at least 2 interoperable implementations, at least.
Okay.
Because right now we have 3, tomorrow we might have 5. And it would be nice to know that the stuff, if there's only one implementation, then de facto that implementation's bugs become the standard, and we really would like for there to be 2 so they could discover their bugs pretty fast.
Okay. Anybody else? Any comments? Otherwise, we're gonna close the meeting. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Let's have a little chat.
Straight? How do you mean? Maybe. Convince him. He has a use case. He has a use case.
Maybe you guys want to